Most people feel that money disappears faster than it should. They do not imagine it. They feel it in the grocery store. They feel it when the rent renewal arrives. They feel it when the mortgage payment, car payment, insurance bill, and credit card statement all seem heavier than they used to be. And because they feel that pressure every week, they begin to believe a dangerous thing. They begin to believe that small amounts of money do not matter. $5 does not matter. $10 does not matter. $35 a week does not matter. That is the mistake. Small amounts matter when they are placed inside the right system for a long enough time. The reason most people never see this is because they measure money in straight lines while wealth grows in curves. A paycheck is mostly linear. You work a week, you are paid for the week. You work another week, you are paid again. If your wage rises 3 or 4%, the improvement is visible but limited. It may feel good for a moment, but inflation often takes it back before you can build real freedom from it. Investments work differently. They can compound, and compounding does not look powerful at the beginning. It looks too small to matter. It looks boring. It looks almost insulting, but over decades, if the assets are productive, the dividends are reinvested, the fees are low, and the habit continues. Compounding can do something your paycheck usually cannot do. It can make money on money, then it can make money on the money that money made. That is the machine. Once you understand that machine, you stop judging a weekly investment by how it looks this month. You start judging it by what it can become when time, ownership, and reinvestment are allowed to work together. That is why a $35 weekly habit can become far more powerful than it looks. The amount looks small, the time horizon changes the amount, the system is what matters. If you have ever felt like your money disappears faster than it should, the reason is that time is working against your cash. Prices rise. Wages lag. Interest rates make borrowing more expensive. The cost of living moves one way while your paycheck tries to catch up from behind. That is the bad side of time. But the same time that punishes cash can reward ownership. That is the central idea. Time works against a paycheck if the paycheck is only spent. Time works for an investment if the investment owns productive assets and is allowed to compound. Most people never make that transition. They spend their lives trying to make the paycheck stretch further. They cut small expenses, they look for coupons, they complain about prices, they work harder, they wait for raises, but they never build the second system, the one where capital begins working beside them. So every month begins again, earn, spend, stress, repeat. That is not freedom. Freedom begins when a part of each paycheck is sent into a machine that keeps working after you are done working. That machine can be very simple. It does not need to be a complicated trading strategy. It does not need to predict the next recession. It does not need to know which company will dominate the next decade. It can be a steady purchase of broad, low-cost index funds every week. That is what makes the idea so important. It is simple enough that almost anyone can understand it. It is small enough that many people can begin it. And it is powerful enough that, over a long enough period, the results can become almost unbelievable to someone who only thinks in straight lines. Let us begin with the pressure people are feeling. Food is one of the clearest examples because food is not optional. You can delay a vacation, you can delay a new phone, you can drive the same car longer, but you cannot stop eating since 2020. Food prices rose in a way that households could feel directly. The source lays out the path: 3.45%, then 3.94%, then a painful 9.95% in 2022, followed by 5.76% in 2023, 2.26% in 2024, and 2.45% in 2025. The result is simple. About $20 of groceries in 2020 became roughly $25.32 by 2025. That is not just data, that is lived experience. It is the same basket of food costing more money. It is a family standing in the grocery aisle wondering why the bag looks the same but the receipt is bigger. That is inflation. And inflation is not only an economic topic, it is a quiet tax on cash. It reduces purchasing power without asking permission. It does not send you a bill, it simply makes the same dollars buy less. That is why keeping all your future inside cash can be dangerous. Cash feels safe because the number does not go down. If you have $1,000, the account still says $1,000. But the real question is not how many dollars you have. The real question is what those dollars can buy. A $1,000 balance can remain unchanged, while the life it can buy gets smaller. Nominal stability can hide real decline. At the same time, borrowing became more expensive. Interest rates moved from near zero in 2020 to around 4.09% by late 2025, according to the source. That shift made mortgages, car loans, credit cards, and other debts feel heavier. A family that could afford one kind of payment in a low-rate world may struggle in a higher-rate world. A consumer who carries credit card debt may feel trapped as interest compounds against them. This is the other side of the pressure. Prices rise. Debt costs rise. But wages do not always rise fast enough. The source points to wage growth around 3.8% year over year in 2025. That may sound respectable until you compare it with the cumulative rise in prices since 2020. A raise that roughly matches 1 year of inflation does not repair 5 years of lost purchasing power. That is why so many people feel like they are running harder without moving forward. The paycheck rises, but the grocery bill rose first. The paycheck rises. But the rent rose too. The paycheck rises. But the car loan, insurance, and credit card costs became heavier. That is the trap of relying only on labor income. Labor income is necessary. It is where most people begin. But if labor income is the only system you have, then inflation can keep pulling you backward. You need a second system. The second system is ownership. Ownership is different from income earned by the hour. When you own a piece of a broad market fund, you own small pieces of many productive companies. Those companies sell products, raise prices, improve technology, pay dividends, buy back shares, expand internationally, and adapt over time. Not every company succeeds. Some fail, some shrink, some disappoint. But a broad index fund owns many companies, so the failures are absorbed by the larger system. That is diversification. You do not need one company to be perfect. You need the productive system to keep growing over time. And historically, the market has shown something important. Crashes happen. They are not exceptions. They are part of the system. The Great Depression happened. The dot-com collapse happened. The 2008 financial crisis happened. The COVID crash happened. The inflation-driven decline in 2022 happened. Every one of those moments felt frightening in real time. When you are inside a crash, the future does not feel obvious. It feels dangerous. People say the system is broken. They say this time is different. They say you should wait until things become clear. But when you step back and look at the long-term chart, a different lesson appears. The market has recovered. The long-term trend has moved upward. That does not mean recovery is guaranteed in every future moment. It does not mean every asset recovers. It does not mean you can buy anything and be fine. But it does show why broad, disciplined, long-term investing has worked for patient owners of productive assets. The market falls, the market recovers. The market eventually makes new highs, and the person who kept buying during the fear bought more shares at lower prices. This is why weekly investing is so powerful. It removes the need to predict the perfect moment. If the market is rising, the money goes in. If the market is falling, the money goes in. If the headlines are scary, the money goes in. If the headlines are optimistic, the money goes in. If inflation is high, the money goes in. If the economy feels uncertain, the money goes in. This is not because the investor knows the future. It is because the investor accepts that not knowing the future is normal and builds a system that does not require perfect prediction. That is called dollar cost averaging. It is not magic. It is discipline turned into a process when prices are high. Your weekly deposit buys fewer shares when prices are low. The same deposit buys more shares over time. You avoid the emotional trap of waiting for the perfect dip or going all in at the worst time. You become steady. And steady is underrated. Most people do not fail in investing because they cannot do advanced math. They fail because they stop, they hesitate, they panic, they chase. They wait for clarity. They invest only when it feels comfortable, which often means they invest after prices have already risen. Weekly investing solves much of that because it turns the decision into a habit. You do not wake up every week asking whether the world is safe. You ask one question: did I invest this week? That question is powerful because it focuses on what you control. You cannot control inflation. You cannot control the Federal Reserve. You cannot control food prices. You cannot control a recession. You cannot control market crashes. You cannot control wage growth. But you can control whether the $35 goes into the machine. That small control repeated for decades can become large. Now, most people struggle to believe that because the early numbers look too small: $20 a week, $35 a week, $5 a day. These do not sound like wealth building numbers. They sound like coffee money. They sound like lunch money. They sound like nothing. But that is because people judge the seed by looking at the seed, not by understanding the tree. A seed does not look like a forest. A weekly investment does not look like a retirement portfolio. But the seed contains a process. The investment contains a process. Let us use the source. Simple example of $20 per week. $20 per week is $1,040 per year. In the first year, you contribute $1,040. If the market grows and dividends are reinvested, the balance may begin moving slightly, but nothing dramatic happens. The first year rarely impresses anyone. By year 3, total contributions are $3,120. With reinvested dividends and growth, the balance may be around $3,750. Now, a small gap appears between what you put in and what the account is worth. That gap is not huge, but it is the beginning of the snowball. By year 5, total contributions are $5,200. The account may be closer to $6,850. The difference is larger, the snowball has more weight, the weekly deposits are landing on a bigger base, the dividends are buying more shares, the growth is being applied to a larger amount of capital. This is the part people need to see. The first 5 years are not where the explosion happens. They are where the base is built. If you judge the strategy during the base building years, you may quit before the math begins to help you. That is the tragedy. Most people look for proof too early. They want the account to reassure them before the account has had time to grow. Compounding requires faith in the early phase, not blind faith, mathematical faith. You understand the curve, so you keep going even when the early line looks flat. That mindset matters more than most people realize. If you measure success week by week, you will become frustrated. Markets do not rise in neat weekly lines. Some weeks the balance falls even though you invested. Some months the account looks stuck. Some years the market goes down. If your emotional rule is, I will continue only when it feels like it is working, you will eventually stop at the wrong time. The better rule is simpler. Success is whether you executed the habit. Did I invest this week? That is the measurement. Not whether the market rewarded me this week, not whether my balance made me feel good, not whether the news is positive. Did I invest this week? If you can ask that question for 30 years, the probability of building meaningful wealth changes dramatically. The mindset shift is from outcome addiction to process discipline. That is one of the most important shifts in money. You cannot control short-term outcomes. You can control the process. And over long periods, a good process can create good outcomes. Now, choosing the investments matters. A weekly habit placed into a terrible asset may not produce the result you want. Consistency is powerful, but consistency into a weak structure can still disappoint. That is why the source focuses on index funds and Fidelity funds that have certain qualities. The first quality is diversification. Diversification means you do not depend on one company, one CEO, one product, one scandal, one patent, one lawsuit, or one earnings report. You own a broad collection of companies. Some do poorly, some do well, some become giants, some disappear. The broad system absorbs individual failures. This is essential because most people are not able to pick the few winning companies that will dominate the future. Even professionals struggle with that. A broad fund lets you own the market rather than trying to predict every winner. Diversification reduces the chance that one mistake destroys the plan. The second quality is broad exposure. Diversification is about owning many companies. Exposure is about what kind of companies you own. Large companies, mid-sized companies, small companies, growth companies, dividend companies, technology, healthcare, consumer businesses, industrials, finance, sustainable companies. Markets rotate. In some years, large technology companies lead. In other years, mid-cap companies recover strongly. In some periods, dividend companies provide stability. In others, growth companies dominate. If your portfolio has broad exposure, you are not fully dependent on one area leading forever. This matters because the future does not repeat in exactly the same way. A resilient portfolio does not need to guess one winner. It owns several engines. The third quality is historical performance and real fundamentals. This means not buying only because of hype. A fund should be backed by assets that have shown an ability to generate earnings, dividends, appreciation, and durable growth over time. Past performance does not guarantee future results, but a long record can tell you something about the underlying businesses and the strategy. The fourth quality is dividend growth. Dividend growth is not only about income today, it is about income increasing over time. If companies raise dividends regularly and those dividends are reinvested, the compounding loop becomes stronger. The dividend buys more shares. Those shares produce more dividends. If dividends grow, the income base can rise. If share prices also appreciate, the portfolio gains two sources of growth. Dividend growth is one of the quiet engines of long-term wealth. The fifth quality is low fees. Fees look small on paper, but over decades they matter enormously. A small fee taken every year is not just money lost today, it is money that no longer compounds tomorrow. If a fund charges high fees, the portfolio has to work harder just to reach the same result. Low fees keep more of the return inside the account. Zero-fee funds can be especially attractive when they provide broad exposure because every saved dollar stays in the machine. This is why low-cost index investing is powerful. It does not require brilliance, it requires structure. Now, the source builds a portfolio using 5 Fidelity funds. The first is FSROX, the Fidelity Zero Total Market Index Fund. This fund is the core. It gives exposure to the total U.S. stock market, including large, mid, and small companies across major sectors. It is designed to track the broad market with zero management fees that makes it a foundation fund. Its job is not to be flashy. Its job is to own the broad productive engine of American companies at very low cost. According to the source, FSROX has a yield of 1.04%, dividend growth of 7.55% per year, and annual price appreciation of 13.5% in the data being used. Those numbers make it a strong growth foundation. The second is FSMDX, the Fidelity Mid-Cap Index Fund, MID. Cap companies are interesting because they sit between small emerging businesses and giant established corporations. They are often more mature than small companies but still have more room to grow than the largest companies. A mid-cap fund adds a different kind of exposure to the portfolio. According to the source, FSMDX yields 2.42%, has dividend growth of 17.21%, and annual appreciation of 7.4%. Its role is to provide exposure to companies still climbing, businesses that may have meaningful growth ahead while already being established enough to be tracked in an index structure. The third is FITLEX, the Fidelity U.S. Sustainability Index Fund. This fund adds a modern edge by screening for companies with strong environmental, social, and governance characteristics, with exposure often connected to sectors like technology, healthcare, and communications. Whatever a person thinks about ESG as a label, the important portfolio role here is exposure to companies positioned around modern growth sectors and long-term resilience. According to the source, FITLEX yields 1.14%, has dividend growth of 13.74%, and annual appreciation of 13.06%. It adds growth and future-facing exposure to the portfolio. The fourth is FGRX, the Fidelity Growth and Income Portfolio. This fund is designed to balance growth with income, focusing largely on high-quality large-cap companies with stable earnings. Its role is to provide dependable income without giving up growth. In a portfolio, balance matters because pure growth can be volatile, and pure income can sometimes lag in appreciation. A growth and income approach tries to combine both. According to the source, FGRX yields 3.13%, has dividend growth of 19.68%, and annual appreciation of 8.17%. That gives it a strong income and growth profile in the example. The fifth is FDGFX, the Fidelity Dividend Growth Fund. This is the income stabilizer in the source portfolio. It focuses on companies with long histories of raising dividends and strong fundamentals. Its job is not to be the most aggressive growth engine. Its job is to strengthen the dividend compounding loop and provide stability when markets cool off. According to the source, FDGFX yields 3.2%, has dividend growth of 18.03%, and annual appreciation of 2.78%. Each fund has a job. FROGS provides broad market foundation. FSMDX provides mid-cap expansion. FITLEX provides modern growth and sustainability exposure. FGRX provides growth and income balance. FDGFX provides dividend growth and income stability. A good portfolio is not random, it is a system of jobs. Each part should do something specific. If 2 funds do the same job, you may not need both. If one area is missing, the portfolio may be exposed. The point is not to own many funds just to look diversified. The point is to own assets that work together. Now, the source uses a simple equal weighted average to measure the portfolio. It takes the dividend yields of the 5 funds: FROX at 1.04%, FSMDX at 2.42%, FITLEX at 1.14%, FGRX at 3.13%, FDGFX at 3.2%. Add them together, and the total is 10.93. Divide by 5. And the average portfolio dividend yield is about 2.19%. Then the same method is used for dividend growth and annual price appreciation, using the source S numbers. The portfolio has an average dividend growth rate of 15.24% and an average annual share price appreciation of 8.98%. These are the numbers that create the projection. Now, I would be careful here. Projections are not guarantees. Markets do not promise a straight line. Dividend growth can slow, funds can change holdings, future returns can be lower than historical returns, recessions can happen, inflation can change, fees, taxes, account type, and behavior can affect results. So the numbers should be understood as an illustration of the machine, not a contract with the future. But illustrations are still useful because they show the power of repeated small contributions when combined with growth and reinvested income. That is the lesson. Now let us look at Josh. Josh invests $5 per Dalton Y. That equals $35 per week. Because the example portfolio has 5 funds, the idea is that about $1 per Dalton Y goes into each fund. That is not much. It is the kind of money that disappears easily, a snack, a drink, a small convenience purchase, something most people spend without feeling the loss. But Josh does something different. He turns the small amount into a rule: $5 a day, $35 a week every week. That habit produces $1,825 per year in contributions. After the first year, the account is still modest. It does not change his life yet. It does not replace a paycheck. It does not make him wealthy. But it establishes the system. By year 10, under the source projection, the portfolio reaches about $32,000. Now the account has weight. It is not life-changing wealth yet, but it is no longer nothing. It is a real financial asset. It is proof that a small habit can accumulate. By year 20, Josh has contributed $36,500 out of his own pocket. The portfolio, with compounding and reinvested dividends, is projected around $160,000. It is generating nearly $9,000 per year in dividends. At that point, something has changed. The portfolio is no longer just a savings bucket. It is an income-producing machine. It is paying Josh while he sleeps. Not enough to replace all income yet, but enough to matter. Then the final decade shows the real power of compounding. By year 30, Josh has contributed $54,750 in total. That is the money he put in from his own pocket. But under the projection, the portfolio reaches about $942,000 and pays around $98,000 per year in dividends, or roughly $8,000 per month. That is the point where the investment income can surpass many full-time jobs. This is the part most people struggle to believe, because the starting habit was so small, $5 per Dalton Y, $35 per week. But the ending number is not created mainly by Josh's contributions. The ending number is created by the system. From $54,750 contributed to $942,000 projected, roughly $887,250 comes from compounding reinvested dividends and market growth over time. That is the machine doing the heavy lifting. Josh did not create nearly $1 million by brute force alone. He created the habit. The habit fed the machine. Time did the rest. That is why the title is powerful. $35 a week can eventually create more income than many full-time jobs if the system works for long enough and the assumptions are favorable. But the deeper lesson is not that every person will get exactly $942,000 or exactly $8,000 per month. The deeper lesson is that small, consistent ownership can change the role money plays in your life. At first, you work for money, then money begins to work for you. Then if the base becomes large enough, money can begin earning more than your labor. That is the transition. Most people never reach it because they stop in the early years. They say the balance is too small. They say the market is too scary. They say $35 is not enough. They say they will start when they have more money. But starting when you have more money can be a trap. You may have more money later, but you will have less time. And time is the multiplier. Waiting for a bigger contribution can cost you years of compounding. A small habit started now can be more powerful than a larger habit delayed too long. This is why the first goal is not perfection. The first goal is motion. Begin the system, even if the amount is small, especially if the amount is small. Because the purpose of the first dollars is not only growth, the purpose is identity. You become the kind of person who invests every week. Once that identity is built, the amount can increase, raises can increase, contributions, bonuses can be added, debt can be reduced, expenses can be optimized, but the habit already exists. Identity precedes scale. A person who invests $5 a day is different from a person who only plans to invest someday. That difference compounds too. Now let us talk about why weekly investing can be better than one-time investing for many real people. Mathematically, if you have a lump sum and a long horizon, investing it sooner has often been better than slowly averaging in because markets tend to rise over time. But real people do not always have lump sums. They receive paychecks weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly. They face bills, they deal with uncertainty, they feel fear when markets drop, they hesitate when prices rise. Weekly investing matches real life. It turns the paycheck cycle into an investment cycle. It also reduces regret. If you invest all at once and the market falls, you may feel foolish. If you wait for a crash and the market rises, you may feel left behind. Weekly investing avoids the need to make one emotionally perfect decision. It makes many small decisions automatically. That is psychologically powerful. The market can be volatile, but the habit remains stable. And in a world where almost everything feels unstable, a stable habit is a form of strength. Now, let us talk about the relationship between wage growth and investment growth. If wages grow around 3 to 4% per year, but a long-term portfolio can grow at 2 or 3 times that rate under favorable historical assumptions, then over time the portfolio can begin outpacing the paycheck. This is not because labor is worthless. Labor is extremely important. It creates the money that feeds the portfolio. But labor income is limited by hours. Salary, employers, health, and the job market capital can scale differently. A $10,000 portfolio growing 10% earns $1,000. A $100,000 portfolio growing 10% earns $10,000. A $100,000 portfolio growing 10% earns $100,000. The percentage is the same. The dollar result is very different. That is why building the base matters. The weekly investment is not exciting at first because the base is small, but eventually the base becomes large enough that the market's movement produces more dollars than your weekly deposits. Then later, dividends and growth may produce more than a paycheck. That is the moment people want. But you do not get that moment without the early phase. The first phase is contribution-driven. The second phase is contribution plus growth. The third phase is growth-driven. The fourth phase can become income-driven. That is the life cycle of compounding. Now let us talk about reinvested dividends. Dividends are often misunderstood. Some people think dividends are just small payments. Others think dividends are unnecessary because growth matters more. The truth is that dividends can be a powerful part of total return, especially when reinvested over long periods. When a fund pays a dividend and you reinvest it, you buy more shares. Those new shares can pay future dividends. Those future dividends buy more shares again. If the companies inside the funds increase dividends over time, the income base can grow even faster. This is a compounding loop. Dividend buys share, share produces dividend, dividend grows, more shares produce more dividends. The loop strengthens over time. That is why the dividend growth rates in the source matter. A portfolio with a 2.19% starting yield may not sound like much, but if dividend income grows at a strong rate and is reinvested, the future income can become large. Again, the power is not in year one. The power is in the curve. Now, one caution is important. A high projected dividend income in year 30 depends on assumptions about dividend growth, yield, reinvestment, and price appreciation. If the future is less favorable, the income may be lower. If dividends are cut or growth slows, the result changes. If taxes reduce reinvestment, the result changes. If the funds change strategy, the result changes. A serious investor does not worship a projection. He studies the variables. But the direction of the lesson remains consistent contributions plus reinvested dividends plus long-term growth can create results that feel disproportionate to the starting amount. That is the point. Now let us talk about fees. The source highlights low and zero fee funds because fees are one of the few things investors can control. You cannot control market returns. You cannot control inflation. You cannot control a recession, but you can control whether you choose high-cost funds when low-cost alternatives exist. A 1% annual fee may not sound large, but over decades, it can consume a meaningful part of your return. It does not only remove money this year, it removes the future growth that money could have produced. That is why fees compound against you. Low fees keep the machine more efficient. When the weekly amount is small, efficiency matters. You want as much of that $35 as possible to remain invested, not eaten by costs. This is why the structure of the portfolio matters almost as much as the habit. A good habit inside an expensive structure leaks money. A good habit inside a low-cost structure gives compounding more fuel. Now let us talk about diversification and psychological survival. A diversified fund is not only mathematically useful, it is emotionally useful. If you own one stock and that stock falls 50%, you may panic. If you own a broad fund and one company inside it fails, the fund absorbs it. You are less likely to blow up the plan because one company disappointed. This matters because the most important investment is not the one with the highest theoretical return. It is the one you can hold through bad periods. A simple diversified portfolio is easier to hold than a portfolio built from speculation and excitement. When markets fall, you can remind yourself that you own a broad system of productive companies, not a single fragile bet that helps you continue the weekly habit. And continuing the habit is everything. Now, let us talk about market crashes again. Every crash creates two realities for the person who has no system. A crash looks like proof that investing is dangerous. For the person with a weekly system, a crash can become an opportunity to buy more shares at lower prices. The emotional experience is still difficult. No one enjoys watching balances fall, but the interpretation is different. If you have a long horizon and continue buying, lower prices are not only pain, they are also future fuel. This is why weekly investing turns volatility into something useful. You do not need to predict the bottom, you just keep buying through the storm. Some of the best future returns are often created by shares bought during ugly periods. But you only buy them if your system keeps working when your emotions are under pressure. That is why automation matters. If the weekly contribution is automatic, you do not have to reapprove the plan every time the news becomes scary. The system acts before fear has time to negotiate. Automation protects you from yourself. That is valuable. Now, let us talk about inflation and investing in a practical way. When food prices rise, the immediate reaction is to reduce spending because you feel squeezed. That may be necessary, but if inflation pushes you to stop investing, it wins twice. It makes your current life more expensive and prevents you from building future purchasing power. This is why the weekly amount matters. It is small enough to keep alive during difficult periods, but meaningful enough to compound over time. A person who cannot invest $500 per month may still be able to invest $35 per week. That is not nothing. It is the beginning of ownership. The goal is to make investing non-negotiable at a small level, then increase it when possible. If you get a raise, increase the weekly contribution. If you pay off a debt, redirect some of the payment into investing. If expenses fall, invest part of the difference. If income rises, do not let lifestyle consume all of it. This is how the machine grows. Start with $35, then make it 40, then 50, then 75. Then 100. The first amount builds identity, the later amounts build scale. Now let us talk about the phrase passive income. People misuse it. They think passive income means no work, no risk, no waiting, no uncertainty. That is not reality. The income in a portfolio comes from earlier disciplines, savings, risk, volatility, and years of compounding. It may feel passive later, but it was not free. It was built. Josh's projected $8,000 per month is not magic. It is the result of 30 years of contributions, reinvestment, and market growth under the assumptions used. It is passive only after decades of active consistency. That distinction matters. There is no shortcut around time. There are ways to use time better. Weekly investing is one of them. Now let us discuss risk. Index funds reduce single company risk but do not eliminate market risk. The whole market can decline. Dividends can be cut. Returns can be lower than expected. Inflation can erode purchasing power. Taxes can reduce after-tax income. The funds in the source are equity funds, which means they can be volatile. If someone needs the money soon, this may not be the right place for it. Long-term money and short-term money should not be treated the same. Emergency funds should be safe and liquid. Money needed for rent, food, tuition, or a house down payment soon should not be exposed to stock market volatility. Weekly investing is for long-term capital, not next month's bills. This is another part of systems thinking. Every dollar needs a job, cash for emergencies, investments for long-term growth, debt payments for reducing obligations, insurance for catastrophic risk. Do not confuse the jobs. The $35 weekly strategy works when the money is allowed to stay invested long enough for compounding to matter. If you invest and then withdraw every time life gets uncomfortable, the system cannot work. That is why you still need an emergency reserve. Liquidity protects the investment plan. Now, let us talk about the role of Fidelity specifically. The source uses Fidelity funds, and Fidelity is known for offering low-cost and zero-expense index funds that can make it easier for small investors because they do not feel punished by fees. If a person invests only $35 per week, they do not want high costs eating the plan, but the principle is bigger than any one platform. The core idea is low-cost diversified index investing with consistent contributions. Fidelity is one way. Other platforms and fund families may offer similar broad market exposure. The exact fund choice matters, but the deeper system matters more. Diversify, keep costs low, invest consistently, reinvest dividends, hold through cycles, increase contributions over time. That is the system. Do not become distracted by names alone. Understand the job each fund does. Now, let us examine the 5-fund structure more carefully. An equal weighted portfolio means each fund gets 20%. That is simple. But simple averages may not match a real portfolio if the actual weights differ. If FSROX becomes 50% of the portfolio and FDGFX becomes 10%, the average yield and appreciation change. If one fund grows faster, the portfolio weights drift, rebalancing may be needed. A serious investor should understand that portfolio metrics depend on weights. The source uses equal weighting for clarity. That is useful. But in practice, you should choose weights based on your goals, risk tolerance, and desire for growth versus income. A younger investor may emphasize broad market growth. An older investor may emphasize income and stability. A person trying to maximize simplicity may choose fewer funds. A person wanting more targeted exposure may use more. The best portfolio is not the one with the most funds. The best portfolio is the one you understand and can follow. Now, let us talk about taxes on dividends. If held in a taxable account, dividends may be taxed in the year they are received, even if reinvested. That can reduce compounding in tax. Advantaged accounts, reinvested dividends may compound without current tax drag. That can make a big difference over decades. So account location matters. A Roth IRA, traditional IRA, 401k, or other retirement account may be a better home for long-term compounding if the person qualifies and the account fits their plan. A taxable brokerage account provides more flexibility and no contribution limits, but may create tax drag. Again, the system matters. The same fund can produce different after tax results depending on where it is held. A serious investor thinks about the whole structure. Now let us talk about the danger of waiting for a better time. People often say, I will start when the market drops. Then the market rises, they say, I will start when inflation cools. Then prices are still high, they say, I will start when I make more money. Then lifestyle costs rise too. They say, I will start when things feel stable. But the world rarely feels stable. There is always a reason to wait: war, inflation, elections, recession, layoffs, high rates, low rates, market highs, market lows, debt ceiling, banking stress, technology disruption. The future never arrives with a sign saying, now it is safe. That is why weekly investing is powerful. It does not wait for psychological comfort. It moves under uncertainty. It assumes uncertainty is normal. That is closer to how the world actually works. Now let us talk about why $35 a week is psychologically smart. It is large enough to matter over time, but small enough to start without needing a dramatic lifestyle overhaul. It is easier to sustain than a large monthly contribution that feels painful. It aligns with weekly spending decisions. It can be automated. It turns investing into a recurring bill paid to your future self. That last phrase is important. Most people pay everyone else first. The landlord, the bank, the grocery store, the phone company, the insurance company, the credit card company. Then they try to save what remains. Usually little remains. Weekly investing flips the order. It sends money into ownership before the month consumes it. That is the principle of paying yourself first, not as a slogan, as automation. If the money leaves before you can spend it, the habit is easier. Now let us talk about what happens when your portfolio begins producing more than the weekly contribution. At first, your contribution is the main driver. If you add $35, the account increases by about $35 plus or minus market movement later. Dividends and market growth may become larger than the weekly deposit. A dividend payment might equal months of contributions. A good market year might add thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. This is the transition from labor-driven growth to capital-driven growth. It is one of the most important moments in wealth building. You realize that your money is not just sitting there, it is working. And when money works at scale, it can work harder than you do. That is why the first years matter. They are creating the base for capital-driven growth later. Now, let us talk about why the portfolio can surpass a full-time job. A full-time job exchanges time for money. There may be raises, there may be promotions, but the income is tied to labor. If you stop working, the paycheck stops. A portfolio producing dividends and growth is different. It can continue while you sleep, while you rest, while you recover, while you spend time with family, or while you work on something else. That does not mean you should stop working as soon as the portfolio produces income. It means your dependency changes. The more investment income you have, the less fragile your life becomes. That is financial freedom, not necessarily retiring at 35, not necessarily never working again. Freedom means you have options. You can leave a bad job, you can reduce hours, you can handle emergencies, you can choose work more deliberately, you can say no, money is not the purpose of life, but money affects the range of choices available in life. A weekly investment habit is a way to buy future choices. Now, let us talk about the common objection. $35 a week is not enough. It may not be enough for every goal, but it is enough to begin. And beginning is more important than people think. If $35 is too small, increase it when you can, but do not use the fact that it is small as an excuse to do nothing. Doing nothing compounds too. Inflation compounds against you. Missed opportunity compounds against you. Bad habits compound against you. Debt compounds against you. If you do not put time to work for you, time may work against you. That is the real comparison. Not $35 versus millions, $35 invested versus $35 disappearing. One becomes ownership. The other becomes memory. That is the difference. Now, let us talk about how to make the habit durable. First, automate it. Do not rely on motivation. Motivation changes, automation continues. Second, schedule it with income. If you are paid weekly, invest weekly. If you are paid bi-weekly, automate around payday. The closer the investment is to income arrival, the less likely the money is consumed elsewhere. Third, keep the portfolio simple. If the portfolio is too complex, you may tinker. Tinkering can be dangerous. A simple 5-fund structure or even a simpler index structure can be easier to maintain. Fourth, reinvest dividends. Do not take the dividends out unless you are in the income stage. During accumulation, reinvestment strengthens compounding. Fifth, review, but do not obsess. Check progress periodically. Do not watch every daily move if it triggers emotion. Sixth, increase contributions. Gradually, every raise, debt payoff, or expense reduction can add fuel to the machine. Seventh, stay invested through downturns. This is the hardest rule and the most important one. The machine works only if you do not unplug it during the storm. Now let us discuss the emotional experience of year 10, year 20, and year 30. At year 10, $32,000 may not feel like financial freedom, but it is proof. It proves the habit can create a real asset. Many people never build even that because they never start or they keep withdrawing. At year 20, $160,000 and nearly $9,000 per year in dividends begins to feel very real. That dividend income might cover several months of groceries, insurance, utilities, or travel. It begins supporting life at year 30. The projection becomes extraordinary, $942,000 and roughly $98,000 per year in dividends is no longer a side account. It is a major financial machine. It can exceed the income from many jobs. It can alter retirement. It can change the family balance sheet. The same habit produced all 3 stages. The difference was time. That is the lesson. Time is the multiplier most people waste because the early numbers do not impress them. Now, let us talk about the role of patience. Patience is not passive. Patience is active discipline over long periods. The person investing $35 a week is not doing nothing. They are doing something small repeatedly while refusing to be distracted by the fact that the world is noisy. That is a form of strength. The market will test that patience. Inflation will test it. Family expenses will test it. Recessions will test it. Headlines will test it. The account balance will test it. But if the process remains, the odds improve. This is why I always come back to principles. A principle is a rule that helps you act when emotions are loud. The principle here is simple. When time works against cash, turn part of cash into productive ownership every week. That principle can change a life if followed long enough. Now let us talk about what this strategy does not do. It does not make someone rich overnight. It does not protect against every downturn. It does not guarantee the exact projected results. It does not eliminate the need for emergency savings. It does not replace earning more. It does not fix high-interest debt by itself. It does not mean every Fidelity fund is right for every person. It does not mean dividends are free money. It does not mean future returns must equal past returns. A serious strategy must be honest about its limits. But the limits do not destroy the value of the habit. They simply remind us to use the habit inside a broader financial system. That broader system should include cash reserves, debt control, insurance, where necessary, career development, tax-aware accounts, and long-term investing. The weekly portfolio is one engine. It should not be the only engine. Now let us think about debt. If you are carrying high-interest credit card debt, it may be more important to reduce that debt before increasing investments. A credit card charging 20% interest is compounding against you faster than most investments can reasonably compound for you. In that case, paying down the card may be the best investment, but once toxic debt is under control, a weekly investing habit becomes essential. This is how you prioritize. Stop the negative compounding, build liquidity, start the positive compounding, increase the positive compounding. That order is powerful. Now, let us talk about the difference between saving and investing. Saving protects, investing grows. You need both. If every dollar is invested and you have no cash, life can force you to sell at a bad time. If every dollar is saved in cash and none is invested, inflation can erode purchasing power. The right system uses cash for stability and investments for long-term growth. A $35 weekly investment does not remove the need for cash reserves. It should exist alongside them. That is another reason to start small. You can build the investing habit without destroying liquidity. Now let us talk about the possibility of increasing income. $35 per week is a great beginning, but if you want faster results, income matters. The source focuses on a small habit, and that is valuable. But the larger principle is that the gap between income and spending is the fuel for investing. If you increase income and keep spending controlled, the weekly contribution can grow. The person who starts at $35 per week and later invests $70, then $150, then $300 per week, can accelerate dramatically. The habit is the seed. Income growth is fertilizer. Do not neglect earning power. Long-term wealth often comes from both. Invest consistently, increase income. Avoid lifestyle inflation, keep costs low. Let time work. Now, let us talk about lifestyle inflation. If every raise becomes a higher car payment, a larger apartment, more subscriptions, and more restaurants, the investment habit may never scale. The paycheck grows, but the gap does not. The portfolio stays small because every increase in income is consumed. This is why automatic contribution increases are powerful. When your income rises, raise the investment amount before lifestyle absorbs it. You can still enjoy some of the raise, but not all of it. Let part of every improvement go into ownership. That is how you convert income growth into wealth growth. Otherwise, you become a higher income person with the same financial stress. Now let us talk about the danger of stopping during recessions. When markets fall, people often stop contributions because they feel unsafe. But falling prices can be exactly when future returns become more attractive. If you stop buying during downturns, you miss the cheaper shares. Then when prices recover, you restart at higher prices. That is backwards. This does not mean blindly investing money you need for bills, but if your long-term plan is funded from money you can invest, downturns are not the time to abandon the plan. They are part of the plan. The weekly habit is designed for them. A crash is not a failure of dollar cost averaging. A crash is one of the moments when dollar cost averaging can work best if you keep going. Now, let us talk about the scale of the projected dividend income. $98,000 per year is about $8,000 per month. That is why the source compares the future portfolio income to a full-time job. For many families, $8,000 per month is life-changing. It can fund retirement, supplement Social Security, pay housing costs, help children, cover health care, or create freedom. But again, the income is not created in year one. It is built through the entire period. People want the $8,000 month. They do not want the $35 week for 30 years. But the first is the result of the second. This is where financial maturity appears. Maturity is doing the small thing long enough for the large thing to happen. Immaturity is wanting the large thing while dismissing the small thing. That is true in investing, business, health, and almost every meaningful area of life. Now let us discuss why the portfolio's dividend yield appears modest at the beginning. A 2.19% yield does not sound exciting. On $1,000, it is only about $21.90 per year. That is not impressive. But dividend yield alone is not the whole story. If the portfolio appreciates and dividends grow, the future income on original contributions can become much larger. This is called yield on cost in a loose sense. If you invest at lower amounts over time and dividends grow, the income produced relative to what you contributed can become very attractive. The key is not chasing the highest yield today. High yield can be a trap if the underlying asset is weak or the dividend is unsustainable. Dividend growth plus capital appreciation can be more powerful than a high starting yield with no growth. That is why the source portfolio includes growth income and dividend growth components rather than only chasing yield. A high yield trap can destroy capital. A growth and income engine can compound. Know the difference. Now let us talk about share price appreciation. The source portfolio's average annual share price appreciation is 8.98%. Combined with dividends and dividend growth, that is what produces the large long-term projection. If price appreciation is lower, the ending value is lower. If higher, the ending value is higher. This is why long-term market return assumptions matter. But the investor does not need to predict annual returns precisely. The investor needs to own productive assets and keep adding to them. Over a 30-year period, the exact annual path will be uneven. Some years may be negative, some years may be flat, some may be excellent. The average matters, but the behavior through volatility matters too. A projection is a map. Real markets are the terrain. You need both the map and the ability to walk through rough terrain. Now let us talk about the role of rebalancing. If the portfolio is equal weighted, some funds may grow faster than others. Over time, the weights drift. Rebalancing brings the portfolio back toward the intended allocation. This can force a disciplined version of buying what lagged and trimming what ran ahead. But rebalancing can also create taxes in taxable accounts, and it should not be done excessively for a small weekly portfolio. New contributions can help rebalance naturally. If one fund becomes underweight, you can direct more new money there. That avoids selling and may reduce tax issues. Again, the system can remain simple. Quarterly or annual review may be enough for many investors. Do not turn a simple plan into a high-maintenance hobby unless you truly understand why. Now, let us talk about what happens if $35 per week feels impossible. Then start smaller, $10 a week, $5 a week, $1 a day. The first goal is not to impress anyone. The first goal is to begin the behavior. If the amount is too small to matter financially today, it may still matter psychologically. It tells your mind that you are an investor. It creates the account, it creates the routine, it makes the next increase easier. A person who starts with $5 per week can become a person who invests $50 per week. A person who waits for the perfect amount may never begin. The perfect amount is the enemy of the first amount. Start, then improve. Now let us talk about the person who says they are too late. If you are older, the 30-year projection may not apply in the same way, but the principle still matters. Weekly investing can build capital, dividends can grow, low-cost funds can help. But the time horizon changes the strategy. An older investor may need more attention to risk, income, allocation, withdrawal planning, and capital preservation. The lesson is not that every person has 30 years. The lesson is that time magnifies consistency. If you have less time, you may need larger contributions, different asset allocation, delayed retirement, lower expenses, or other planning, but doing nothing because you started late makes the problem worse. Late is not ideal, but late and consistent is better than late and frozen. Now, let us talk about the person who is young. If you are young, this message is especially important because time is your greatest asset. You may not have a high income yet. You may not have large savings, but you have years. A small weekly habit started early can become more valuable than a large habit started much later. Young people often underestimate time because they have so much of it. That is exactly why they should use it. The earlier money enters the machine, the longer it can compound. That is why $5 per Dalton Y can become meaningful. Not because $5 is large, because time is large. Now, let us talk about what it means to beat a paycheck. A paycheck is linear and active. A portfolio is nonlinear and increasingly passive. At first, the paycheck is everything. It funds life and contributions. The portfolio is small, then the portfolio grows. Its returns begin to rival contributions later. The returns may rival income. Eventually, portfolio income may exceed labor income. This is the sequence every wealth builder should understand. Do not resent the paycheck. Use the paycheck to build the portfolio. Do not worship the paycheck. It has limits. The paycheck is the bridge from labor to capital. That is the right way to think about it. Now let us talk about the moral of the inflation data. Food rising from $20 to $25.32 is not just about groceries. It is proof that money sitting still is moving backward. Interest rates rising from near zero to around 4.09% show that the cost of borrowing can change quickly. Wages growing around 3.8% show that labor income may struggle to keep pace with living costs. Market crashes show that volatility is unavoidable. Long-term market recovery shows that productive ownership has historically rewarded patience. Put these together, and the conclusion is clear. The world is uncertain. Cash loses power, debt can become heavier, wages may lag, markets crash, markets recover. So the rational response is not to try to predict everything. The rational response is to create a simple, repeated investment system that can operate through uncertainty. That is the weekly habit. Now let us close with the deepest idea. Most people think they need a large amount of money to begin investing. They do not. They need a system that turns small money into ownership. The first $35 will not change your life. The second will not either. The 10th may still feel small. The 100th will begin to show something. The 1,000th may be part of a machine you can finally see. And decades later, the habit that felt too small to matter may become the difference between depending entirely on a paycheck and owning a portfolio that pays you more than many jobs. That is what compounding does. It hides the result from impatient people, then rewards the people who stayed. The question is not whether $35 looks powerful today. It does not. The question is whether you can respect a small action enough to repeat it before the world applauds it. That is how wealth is built. Not by waiting for the perfect market, not by trying to outsmart every crash, not by chasing the loudest investment, but by consistently turning a small part of your paycheck into ownership of productive assets, reinvesting the income, keeping fees low, diversifying across strong funds, and letting time become your ally instead of your enemy. Time is already working. The only question is whether it is working against your cash or for your investments. A weekly habit decides which side you are on, and if you choose correctly, the same force that makes life feel more expensive can eventually help your portfolio become more powerful than your paycheck.